You have never truly faced illness alone. Not once. The last time you were sick, really sick, there was a number you could call, a building you could walk into, a person with a decade of training who would listen to your symptoms and hand you a solution in a small white bag before you drove home. You did not have to know what was wrong with you. You did not have to figure it out. You did not have to survive it through anything except patience and the instructions on the label. Now take all of that away. Every pill, every doctor, every hospital, every number to call, every person trained to help. Take away the knowledge that anything effective even exists, and get sick anyway. That is the situation every single human who ever lived faced for the first 190 years of our existence. And here is what makes it genuinely extraordinary. Most of them survived it, not because they were lucky, not because illness was somehow gentler then, but because something was already in place long before the first doctor ever existed that was more sophisticated, more organized, and more effective than anyone today is comfortable admitting. Let us start with the image that is completely false. Most people picture ancient illness the same way. Primitive human, fever building. Nobody knows what to do. Death arrives quickly because nothing effective exists to stop it. The ancient world as a place where sickness meant almost certain death because the tools to fight it had not been invented yet. That picture is wrong in almost every detail. Here is what the archaeological record actually shows. Skeletal remains from ancient human populations show evidence of serious illness survived. Tuberculosis lesions on bones that healed completely. Severe infections in teeth and jaw that the body overcame without intervention. Broken bones that reset and knitted back together properly. Injuries that should have been fatal given the circumstances but were not. The bodies that came through the ground after tens of thousands of years told a story that directly contradicted the story modern people assumed was true. These were not people dying from everything. These were people surviving things that required help to survive. And that help existed long before anyone called it medicine. Here is the first thing that happened when an ancient human got sick. The group stopped, not partially, not in a token way. The entire social structure of the group reorganized around the sick individual immediately and automatically. This was not charity. This was not sentiment. This was survival mathematics operating at the group level. Every member of an ancient human group represented an irreplaceable investment. Years of accumulated knowledge, hunting skills that took a decade to develop, plant knowledge that took longer, social relationships that held the group's internal structure together, child care capacity, shelter building ability, fire management knowledge, warning system participation. Every adult in a group of 30 people was a critical node in a network that kept everyone alive. Losing that node was expensive in a way that modern humans have no equivalent for. There was no replacement, no hiring process, no training program. The knowledge that person carried either survived with them or disappeared entirely, which meant keeping sick members alive was not compassion separate from survival. Keeping sick members alive was survival. The same survival calculation that drove everything else the group did. So when someone got sick, the group responded with everything it had. Here is specifically what happened and the evidence behind each element. The sick person stopped moving. This sounds obvious, but the implications are significant. In a group that moved constantly, that covered miles every day in the search for food and water and safety, choosing to stop moving for a sick member represented an enormous collective sacrifice. Food stores depleted faster when the group stayed still. Territory advantages were lost. Seasonal timing was disrupted. The group paid a real cost to give the sick member the one thing a healing body requires above almost everything else. Rest, genuine rest, not reduced activity. Complete cessation of the demands that consume the energy a body needs to repair itself. Modern medicine rediscovered this principle and gave it clinical language, but ancient humans practiced it instinctively because they observed what happened to sick members who kept moving versus sick members who stopped. The ones who stopped survived more often. The knowledge embedded itself in group behavior without anyone needing to understand the mechanism. Then came heat management. Fever is the body's primary immune response. Temperature elevation kills pathogens that cannot survive above a certain threshold. Your body knows this without being told. It has known it for millions of years. Ancient humans observed that sick members generated unusual heat, and their response was not to cool them down. It was to maintain the heat while preventing it from going high enough to become dangerous. Fire positioned close but not too close. Animal skins used to hold warmth against the body. The sick member kept away from cold ground and cold air. This was not accidental comfort. This was a practically developed understanding that the heat the sick body was producing was doing something useful and needed to be supported rather than interrupted. But the most sophisticated element of the ancient response to illness was not rest and heat management. It was the pharmacopoeia. Every ancient human group maintained a working knowledge of medicinal plants that researchers now understand was accumulated over tens of thousands of years of careful observation. Which plants reduced fever, which reduced inflammation, which accelerated wound healing, which killed infection when applied directly, which provided pain relief significant enough to allow rest, which were dangerous in certain combinations or certain quantities. This knowledge was not written down. It was not held in a single individual. It was distributed across the group, concentrated most heavily in specific members who specialized in its application, and passed down through direct teaching across generations with the same care that hunting knowledge and shelter building knowledge were passed down. At a Neanderthal burial site in Iraq dating back 60,000 years, archaeologists found medicinal plants arranged deliberately around the body. Yarrow, groundsel, ephedra, plants with confirmed anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, and fever-reducing properties 60,000 years ago, before any civilization existed anywhere on Earth, before any written record of any kind. Someone already knew what those plants did well enough to include them in a burial. The knowledge was that old, that established, that carefully maintained. When someone in an ancient group got sick, the plant response was not desperate experimentation. It was the application of a knowledge system that had been refined across more human test cases than any modern clinical trial has ever approached. Run that through the survival filter. Willow bark contains salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin. Ancient humans across dozens of cultures with no contact with each other independently discovered that chewing willow bark reduced fever and pain, not because they understood chemistry, because they observed outcomes across thousands of sick people over thousands of years, and the pattern was unmistakable. Honey applied to wounds creates an antibacterial environment that prevents infection. Ancient humans used honey on wounds consistently across multiple continents. Modern wound care specialists have studied why it works and found that its antimicrobial properties are genuinely significant. The ancient humans did not need the explanation. They had the results. Turmeric contains curcumin, one of the most studied anti-inflammatory compounds in modern pharmacology. It has been used medicinally for over 4,000 years across Asia and the Middle East. The people who first used it did not know what curcumin was. They knew what happened when they used it versus when they did not. This is empirical medicine. Observation leading to repeatable application, leading to refined knowledge, leading to better outcomes. The same method modern medicine uses, running on different technology but the same fundamental process. Here is the element of ancient illness response that modern medicine finds most difficult to categorize. Every ancient human group had a specific individual whose primary role was responding to illness and injury within the group. The specific title varies across cultures and across time. Shaman, medicine person, healer, witch doctor in the language of cultures that did not understand what they were observing. But the role itself appears in every human group ever studied without exception. This person was not simply someone who knew which plants to use. That knowledge was distributed across the group. The healer's role was more specific and more complex. They managed the sick person's psychological state during illness. This sounds like a soft addition to the hard work of physical treatment. Modern research suggests it was anything but. The placebo effect, one of the most studied and least understood phenomena in modern medicine, demonstrates that belief in treatment produces measurable physical outcomes. Immune function improves, inflammation reduces, pain decreases, healing accelerates. Not because anything pharmaceutical happened, because the brain, convinced that recovery is possible and underway, activates biological systems that support recovery in ways that are now being documented with clinical precision. Ancient healers produced this effect deliberately and consistently. The ritual surrounding treatment was not superstition separate from the real medicine. The ritual was medicine. It produced neurological and immunological changes in the sick person that the plant treatments alone could not produce. The healer who combined genuine plant pharmacology with deliberate psychological intervention was producing a treatment approach that modern medicine is only now beginning to seriously explore under the label of mind-body medicine. Here is the part that completes the picture honestly. Not everyone survived. Children were particularly vulnerable. The elderly faced illness with immune systems already depleted by decades of exposure exposure and accumulated damage. Injuries that compromised mobility were often fatal, not because they were untreatable, but because a group that could not slow down indefinitely eventually had to move, and a member who could not move with them faced the impossible mathematics of survival alone. Ancient skeletal records show this clearly. Infant and child mortality was significant. Life expectancy figures for ancient humans that sometimes appear as low as 30 years are almost entirely driven by childhood death rates. The adults who survived childhood and avoided catastrophic injury lived considerably longer than those averages suggest. Some skeletal remains show individuals surviving well into their 50s and 60s in conditions that should have been impossible without modern medicine. The ones who survived illness in ancient times survived because of everything described here: rest, heat management, plant pharmacology, group care, psychological support from the healer, and the fundamental biological reality that the human immune system, properly supported, is extraordinarily capable. The ones who did not survive were not failed by ignorance. They were failed by the hard limits of what any treatment system can do when the illness is severe enough and the body's resources are already stretched thin enough. Those limits still exist today. They are just less visible behind everything modern medicine has built to push them back. Modern doctors studying ancient medical practices describe a recurring experience. You begin the research expecting to find primitive fumbling toward the solutions that real medicine eventually discovered. What you find instead is a system so well adapted to the specific conditions it operated in, so refined by so many generations of observation and application that the word primitive stops feeling accurate. It stops feeling accurate because it is not accurate. Ancient medicine was not failed modern medicine. It was a completely successful ancient medicine, successful at doing exactly what it needed to do for exactly the people it served in exactly the conditions they faced. The knowledge that a sick person needed rest came from watching sick people who rested versus sick people who did not. The knowledge that certain plants help came from watching people who used them versus people who did not. The knowledge that psychological support changed outcomes came from watching people who received it versus people who faced illness alone. Every piece of knowledge was paid for by someone's survival or someone's death. Observed, remembered, passed forward, refined by the next generation, and the one after that, and the one after that, until it was as precise as accumulated human observation across tens of thousands of years could make it. You did not inherit a world that figured out healing from scratch. You inherited a world built on top of a foundation that was already extraordinary. The doctors came later. The healing came first. The next time you sit in a waiting room, the next time you fill a prescription, the next time you are handed something in a small white bag that will fix what is wrong with you before the day is over, remember what it is built on. Not invented from nothing. Inherited from people who had nothing but fire and plants and each other and the absolute refusal to let a sick person face it alone. Every doctor who has ever helped you is standing on the shoulders of people whose names were never written down, who learned what they knew the hardest possible way and passed it forward anyway, across 60,000 years to reach you. This is Primal Pages. We do not just explain history. We explain everything history quietly built inside you without ever asking for credit. If this reached something in you that already knew it was true, you know what to do. We will be here every week, going deeper into the dark to bring back what was buried.